afternoon. Today, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, ex-Vice President of Egypt, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, has joined us to discuss the global safety issues. Good afternoon, Dr. ElBaradei.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Non-proliferation of nuclear weapons is a priority in Kazakhstan's foreign policy. How do you assess the initiatives of Nur-Sultan in this field? Can we expect that the call for a renunciation of nuclear weapons will be supported by nuclear powers?
Well, I think nuclear disarmament is a priority, should be a priority. I mean, climate change and nuclear holocaust are really the two major issues the world is facing today. I think Kazakhstan was absolutely one of the trailblazers in talking about disarmament, actually doing the talk and doing the walk, making sure that they got rid of their nuclear weapons, the high enriched uranium. So, but we still have a lot of difficulty, I mean, to convince the weapon states that we cannot continue to live in a world who rely on mutual assured destruction, MAD as they call it. That is not a sustainable regime. Even worse, it is based on haves and have-nots. Some countries rely on nuclear weapons, others do not. So it is not sustainable in my view. With the spread of technology right now, you cannot sustain such a regime. So we need to move toward nuclear disarmament. But the challenge is how to make sure to change the mindset of the nuclear weapon states. The challenge is to tell them, the rest of the world, we do not want to live under this kind of Damocles' sword. As you remember, there was a treaty recently, treaty to ban nuclear weapons, with over 120 some countries signing that treaty. The weapon state did not. So there is a chasm, there is a split, a strong split between the weapon states who are saying nobody should have nuclear weapon except us and the rest of the world. So what we need is to continue to talk, dialogue. I mean, there is no other way. You cannot force them to do it, but we have to put as much pressure, moral pressure actually, on them to say that we do not want to see this to continue. The world is under horror. If one of these weapons will be detonated intentionally or by mistake, we are gone. We are sleepwalking, as I keep saying. We are sleepwalking into self-destruction unless we change course.
You won the Nobel Peace Prize for your efforts to prevent the use of nuclear energy for military purposes. Could you please tell us what efforts you undertook in bringing the world closer to establish a dialogue in the field of nuclear non-proliferation?
I mean, I've been, during my tenure as a Director General, basically saying what I'm saying to you now, that non-proliferation is good, but non-proliferation is just one leg. The whole regime is based on two legs, standing on two legs, non-proliferation and disarmament. And you cannot amputate one leg, which is nuclear disarmament, and rely on just one. It doesn't work. I tried also to talk about multinationalizations of the nuclear fuel cycle, which ended with a fuel bank here in Kazakhstan. I think that was one of the concrete efforts I did try to do, to say, well, there are other ways. If we want to move into a different direction, into a more peaceful world, there are steps that we can take, and one of them is just to make sure that the production of all nuclear material under international control. So to have a better control on any country trying to develop a nuclear weapon. We, of course, the agency and I, had a lot of work, during the Iraq, before the Iraq war, which again we tried to avoid, stop that war, because we didn't see any evidence, to support an invasion of Iraq. There was no nuclear weapon for sure, and my colleague Hans Blix also said there was no chemical or biological, but we didn't succeed, unfortunately. However, the war was conducted outside the Security Council, which basically outside international legitimacy, In Iran, we have tried to do as much. Iran is still continuing, and I'm sure probably you will ask me on that. But again, we hope to solve the Iranian issue through dialogue, through respect, through mutual assurance, security assurances, and I've said that, I continue to say that, we need to make sure that force is not a solution. Force cannot resolve any of these issues.
Once you said that there is not a single element in nuclear energy that does not have a political dimension. How do you assess the current situation in relation to the Iranian nuclear program? Will the remaining parties of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action adhere to their commitments?
I definitely hope so. I definitely hope also that the United States will join the agreed framework, the agreement, the joint agreed framework. This is an agreement that took many years to conclude. This was an agreement that guaranteed that Iran, at least for 10 years, will not have the possibility to have nuclear weapon. 10 years is a long time to continue to work with the Iranian, with the region, with the state of in the region, to try to have a nuclear weapon-free zone, possibly in the Middle East, a nuclear security guarantees. But for the U.S. to step out of the agreement and to say that's not good enough, well, what we see right now is not the greatest. This policy, so-called, of maximum pressure is met by maximum pressure from the Iranian and maximum resistance. And this is it leads to increased tension in the region. It doesn't solve anything. So I still hope, but I hope people will come to their senses and make sure that dialogue, understanding where each party is coming from, and trying to compromise, respect, dialogue. These are values, are crucial to not only to nuclear disarmament, but to our humanity and our peace in the world.
For more than 10 years, you have been the head of IAEA. And how do you evaluate the organization's activities at the present stage?
Well, I think the International Atomic Energy Agency is trying its best. People there are trying to fulfill its mandate, which to make sure that nuclear energy is used exclusively for peaceful purpose. It has a lot of challenges, as in the case of Iran right now, as in the case of North Korea before, Iraq before, but within the mandate they have, within the resources they have, I think they're doing their best. But the IAEA, like any other international organization, its success depends on authority, the mandate they have, and the resources, And I think the International Atomic Energy Agency in many areas, like nuclear safety, nuclear security, even nuclear non-proliferation, would benefit from getting additional mandate and obviously additional resources. But within the constraint, within the framework, existing framework, I think they're doing an excellent job.
Sanction policy remains one of the key instruments of pressure on the so-called threshold countries. Do you consider such an approach effective and justified?
Sanction is, as one of my colleagues once mentioned, when you have no policy, you apply sanctions. That is basically, it's not a policy. A policy means you have to understand the issue, you have to talk to the people, you have to see what is behind their behavior or misbehavior, and you try. I'm not saying that sanctions is excluded, under any circumstances. Sanction is also even part of the United Nations Charter. So it is there, but it is not the first resort. It's not the action of first resort. You have first to try the carrot, the incentives. You have to understand, to tell people, if you behave in this direction, they will be better for you, and try to create the condition for them to change behavior. Only if and for whatever reason that doesn't work, you have to use sanctions. Diplomacy is basically a balance between carrot and stick, and how to maintain a proper balance between incentives and disincentives is the real issue, is the real art of diplomacy. But I think we've lost a lot lately in trying to rush into sanction without trying to work on the incentives, on the dialogue, on the respect, on the psychology. These are issues, in my view, has been neglected recently. We talk recently, as we have seen in Iran, for example, about maximum pressure. Well, that is not, to me, would be the first thing to do, maximum pressure, but maximum interaction, maximum respect, maximum dialogue, maximum compromises. These are, then I talk about maximum pressure.
The recently launched negotiation process between the United States and North Korea caused debates among experts. In your opinion, is there a prospect of a positive outcome of the negotiations that have begun?
Yeah, obviously there is a prospect. Hope there is a prospect. The situation, North Korea has been, this issue of North Korea has been on the table for at least 30 years right now. When, one step forward, one step backward. We need to come to a conclusion. Obviously, North Korea, rightly or wrongly, feel insecure. They have a sense of insecurity. They need to get maximum security assurance that they will not be attacked if they give up nuclear weapons. They obviously incentive, as I said, would be very helpful there. Economic development, would be very, very important for them. But unfortunately, we still also live in a world. If you have nuclear weapons, you have power and prestige. We cannot escape that. That countries who have nuclear weapons are regarded, with certain prestige. They have power. So we need also simultaneously with our dialogue on North Korea to show them that they are not the only one who are going to be disarmed, but the others also will do the same. So yes, I believe we have to continue to work on North Korea. It's an unacceptable situation, as much as the continuation of countries with nuclear weapons, still very unacceptable to me and to many other people, obviously.
In 2020, a regular conference of the parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons will be held. What the key aspects do you think are important to be discussed in the framework of this forum?
Well, there's a number of issues. Obviously, there is the whole Middle East nuclear weapon-free zone, the tension in the Middle East, Iran, Israel, who has nuclear weapon out of the system. The whole tension in there. I think you need to continue to work on peace in the Middle East, and of course, nuclear weapon-free zone, nuclear security structure for the Middle East, which is not there. A security framework. How does countries, people in the Middle East live together in peace? Iran, of course, is still an issue very much there. Nuclear disarmament, obviously. These countries, the whole conference, again, a reminder that the weapon states made a commitment to move toward nuclear disarmament in 1970. This is 50 years ago, and yet we still see a race to modernize nuclear weapons. We still see a race to feel that we should have more sophisticated weapons. We talk about weapon in space. So this is all should be discussed in this conference. As I mentioned, again, there was a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. I think parties to that treaty, or also party to the non-proliferation treaty, should tell the weapon states, let us at least have a dialogue. Let's start a dialogue. How you could eventually join the treaty to ban nuclear weapons. It might not be tomorrow, but let's agree on a roadmap. But to continue to say, no, we are not going to join that treaty because nuclear weapons is important for security. Well, this is about faith. This is change of heart completely from the commitment they made in 1970. So there is a lot of good stuff, if you like, to be discussed at the conference, and discussed honestly, openly, and with a view to change this whole landscape, which is, to me, is very scary. when you think about it.
The suspension of the treaty on the elimination of intermediate and short-range missiles indicates that the main components of the international arms control systems are collapsing. Do you think these events can become a catalyst for a new arms race?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the whole nuclear arms control regime is literally collapsing, as you said. The only remaining treaty, New START, is coming to an end in February 2021, in 14, 15 months. And the Americans and the Russians are not even talking about renewal. And in fairness, the Russians are talking that they would like to see a renewal. The Americans have not yet made up their mind. So in a year and few months, we might have a total collapse of the nuclear arms control regime. This is the first time since maybe the 1980, when we have no system, no limitation, and no predictability. There is no, and of course, once you have a tabula rasa, once you have no rules, each country, will rush into to modernize their weapon, as they do it. Modernize their weapon, have a better weapon, have a more sophisticated weapon, have better launching systems. All the horror you hear about now with the new technologies, So maybe it is, it's an opportunity to step and reflect. Where are we heading? We are heading into totally the horrible unknown. We're heading into a future when we might wake up tomorrow morning and see half the world has been obliterated by a nuclear weapon that probably launched by mistake.
One of the initiatives of Kazakhstan in strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime is the implementation of the project to deploy the bank of low-enriched fuel in the Ulba metallurgical plant in Usk-Kamenogorsk. How do you assess the appearance of nuclear fuel bank in Kazakhstan?
Well, I think it's a very important step. I mentioned that during my time at the IAEA, I was talking about the whole multinationalization of the fuel cycle. The first step was to have a fuel reserve bank of low-enriched uranium, so countries can be assured of nuclear supply and not to have to go and have their own enrichment facilities, or which is obviously the more enrichment facilities you have around the world, the more danger you have, because once you have enriched uranium, it's easy to switch it into developing a nuclear weapon. So it's a very important step on the road to nuclear disarmament. But unfortunately, again, since we have done that, and I laud Kazakhstan for the step, I laud President Nazarbayev, for the initiative he took to host the bank here in Kazakhstan. But we need to see that followed up by other measures. And as we just mentioned, we're going into reverse. We're going into reverse gear. We're not moving forward.
Today, proposals to create nuclear weapon-free zones in Central Europe, South Asia, in the Middle East remain relevant. What measures do you think should be taken in order to implement these initiatives?
I think the measure, security is part of or nuclear security or nuclear control is part of a nuclear security architecture. I think in all these regions, the countries of the region need to agree on the modalities of regional security. And part of it, of course, is nuclear control or a nuclear weapon-free zone, a ban of nuclear weapons. So in my view, they need to put it in the larger context of what sort of regional security regime we have. And if they agree, and there's still a lot of disagreement, how to ensure regional security, then of course, it would become much easier to have a nuclear weapon-free zone. However, there is absolutely no justification, in any of these regions to have any country who have nuclear weapons, because if one has nuclear weapon, the neighbor will try to have nuclear weapon, and then we have a spiral again. And you can imagine, now we have 9 countries with nuclear weapon. Imagine a world like with 20 or 25 countries have nuclear weapons, the odds that they will be used is much, much higher, you know.
Thank you for the interview. It was a great honor to have you today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks.
Thanks.